This episode is sponsored by JDAQA Software Testing, your scalable solution for manual, automated, security, and performance testing. Check us out at jdaqa.com. And with that, let's get on with the show.
This is The First Customer, hosted by Jay Agner.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to the First Customer Podcast. My name is Jay Agner. Today, I am lucky enough to be joined by Dan Balcauski, who, by the way, has the coolest way of remembering how to say his name, which we'll cover at some point. Founder and Chief Pricing Officer at Product Tranquility. Very nice to have you, Dan. How are you, buddy?
I'm excited to be here, Jay. I'm doing very well on this beautiful spring day.
Is it 1,000,000 degrees in Austin, Texas yet?
Close. We're fingers crossed. Don't jinx us.
Okay, I was gonna say it's beautiful here. It's in the 70s, so I this is my favorite. Did you grow up in Where did you grow up? Did you grow up in Austin? And did that have any impact on you being an entrepreneur later in life?
No, I grew up in Chicago and I moved to Texas as soon as I could. I realized that, I did not want to live in the tundra the rest of my existence. And so I was one of the early folks to flee to Austin about a little over 20 years ago now. So I've been here for a while, but no plans to leave anytime soon.
Beautiful. And did you have any entrepreneurial kind of influence when you were growing up?
Absolutely not. Father was an electrician, mother was a school teacher. Did not really know any entrepreneurs growing up. Didn't really think in that kind of lens. Was more focused on, well, when I went to graduated high school, it was the height of the .com bubble. And so, I guess there were dreams of, go get my engineering degree and then, become a centimillionaire at 25 after, making a website that didn't have any customers or revenue. It seemed to be very popular dream in those days, but it never really got that far. I graduated from college into the dearth of the .com bust, so those dreams didn't really pan out in that flavor. But no, there was really no one else to look around to. It wasn't really on my radar then. Got a little bit more of a taste of it as I started thinking about going to business school, and then met some other folks there who were more entrepreneurial minded. But was not in the water, as we say, in growing up in Chicago.
Got it. So what was the first business you started?
Well, this was the first business I started, Product Tranquility.
Cool.
So I had kind of super quick background. So I've been in the software space my entire career, most heavily on product management and product strategy side of things. So I had it in my head, that combined with my engineering background, that I would start some sort of product company. But either I'm too pragmatic, I would go pragmatic, not pessimistic. I feel like I never had an idea that I really felt to go whole hog and commit myself to. I would be able to poke 1,000 reasons into any idea I came up with as to why it wouldn't work. So that never really got off the ground. And it wasn't really until I'd kind of gone different levels of experience in different companies, and did a year and a half traveling around the world trying to figure out what the next phase of my career would be. And I was like, you know what, never gonna get better time than now to try to actually go start that company. And still didn't think of product that I wanted to throw myself into, but I was like, well, I believe in myself, so let me go try to do a consulting services business. And so that was kind of the net of it, and went off. And I was like, well, let me see if worst case, I know how to go get a job. And so we'll give this little experiment a run. And 5 years later, still treating it as somewhat of an experiment, but I am pleasantly surprised with how it's worked out.
That's beautiful. And I think that's you glossed over it a little bit, but I think it's a really fair and important point that people need to remember is like, if you're putting off starting a business forever, number one, you're never going to start it. And number two, you can find another job. You can go back and like you're not, this isn't something where it's like a death sentence and you can never, people are going to turn away from you with their nose, held if you go start a business. So it's a really important point that you can fall back on what you've been doing. And if you want to go take the risk to start a business, do it. And it may be the best thing you ever did. And if the worst thing to happen is, I mean, I've told myself the same thing, which is why I'm keen on it. I told myself, I have 6 kids, and I'm like, if heaven forbid this thing falls apart, like I can go get another job. I don't have to do this forever, and I can pay the bills, and it won't be that big of a deal. But it was the best thing I ever did. So I think I love that, and I think that's a great point. So tell me a little bit about Product Tranquility. I know it's around B2B pricing, and you kind of mentioned doing a consultancy angle. How does somebody work with you today?
Yeah, so Product Tranquility, the very short version, all we do is help B2B software companies, B2B SaaS, as we say in the business, with pricing and packaging for new and existing products. So uh, we work with, mostly what I'd say, growth stage scale up companies who, they've hit some sort of usually inflection point in their business. So a couple of different things that, we tend to see are common triggers are things like they've outgrown their original sort of target market. They've now sort of their new segment they're going after doesn't their value and pricing don't align as well. They have grown organically or inorganically with like a new product line, so they have a burgeoning sort of portfolio. And so you can imagine if you do an acquisition of another company and they have an entire different way that they price and package, all of a sudden you're going to make your entire go-to-market team head spin. The sales guy trying to cross-sell another product and they have to explain, oh, it works entirely differently. Once you get to the pricing conversation, it becomes very difficult. So those tend to be, triggers. Obviously, we had decades high inflation that nobody in the software space has ever seen before, and obviously you had much higher gross margins there, but just keeping pace with rising costs. I mean, fixed costs, obviously engineer salaries went up tremendously over the last several years as well. So folks were, that's been a trigger as well. And so yeah, we'll go in and do either a diagnostic to help kind of figure out where there's strengths and areas of opportunity. We'll do advisory coaching, or go and help run along side by side, do external market research, help do data analysis to help them figure out which direction they should go. So those are a few of the ways that we work with clients today.
I like that. No, it's an interesting, and I honestly never heard of a service like that before, which is the same sentiment I get a lot with our company, considering all we do is QA, and people go, That's all you do?" I'm like, "That's all we do." So, but I love that hyper focus, and it lets you kind of, really just become the master of that domain. And I love the fact that you're really diving in there. So, who was your first customer?
Yeah, well, it didn't start so focused, so I don't want to give the sheen of un just positivity the whole way along. It was
Sure.
it,
Yeah.
it
Yeah.
started much more general. The idea before was I'd been in sort of the product management, product strategy space. Again, I'd been in software the whole time, and there was a lot of especially as you look at kind of startups, earlier stage companies, there's a lot of folks that do fractional work. So fractional chief financial officer, fractional legal counsel, or fractional chief marketing officer. So I kind of looked at that as like, well, there's not really anyone doing anything in the product space like that. So either
Mhm.
there's a golden opportunity or it's a terrible idea. It turns out it's a terrible idea. So happy to elaborate if anyone's interested on why that is. But, over time, refined it based upon a blend of the experience I could bring to the table, of problems I'd solved, and most importantly, market need. And so worked on, it was actually quite a extensive process of iterating over time to figure out what exactly that focus should be. So don't want to give any sense that this was handed down on high and it was predestined from the get-go.
Right.
There was a lot of sort of wandering in the wilderness for a while to figure that out. The first customer, though, that was early in the journey. So as I mentioned before, I was starting this business. I decided I was going to make this well, we'll give it 6 months. If it doesn't happen, we'll let it go. The first customer, like many folks who go off and try to do more of a services type business, came through reaching out to my network. There was ex-colleagues I'd work with. I will give a recommendation to folks. I made it a lot harder on myself than need be. I don't regret my year and a half backpacking adventure around the world, but let me just say I was not doing a whole lot of business networking when I was on that trip. And so a good chunk of my network had, it wasn't it wasn't in the deep freeze, but it was definitely not warm. So
Sure. Yeah,
had to do a lot of just, hey, reintroducing myself to a lot of folks and saying, hey, this is kind of what I'm thinking now. And it actually wasn't that long. I think within like probably 30, 60 days, if I remember back, again, it's 5 years ago. So I think it was, yeah, 1 or 2 months, I had my first customer or client, and, they needed some, assistance looking at, some, retention problem and customer retention issue. And so I, was able to make that acquaintance through, again, my network, who was, they had a couple investors in that space as well. And then one of those investors introduced me to one of their portfolio company CEOs and had a conversation. It was kind of off to the races from there.
yeah. No, I love that honesty that it's not all sunshine and rainbows, because it's not. And there's the scary figures of, like, whatever, 90% of businesses fail and all that. Everybody hears those things and they go, well, I guess this is it. I'm not gonna, I'm gonna try it. Have you dipped your toe into partnerships and working with, multiple organizations through kind of connections through partnerships? Have you done any of that work, or has it just been kind of one-on-one, finding people that might be a fit, pitching at them with what you can do? Or have you kind of broadened that out a little bit to maybe work with a group of, like, because you mentioned the venture guy, or that, or there's investor groups have a bunch of companies in their portfolio. Is that an angle that you've looked at or taken at all?
Yeah, no, it's a great question. And so obviously this advice is going to be different for different folks because software is kind of a weird industry. Calling software an industry is almost a misnomer. Mark Andreessen of Andreessen Horowitz fame, he had the famous phrase, software is eating the world. And it's true. It's like the software businesses span every single kind of industry. And so there's very little in terms of a software industry, as it were. And one of the few sort of connection points is investor groups, whether it's private equity or venture capital. There's some more loose sort of affiliations of software groupings, but it's not like, I imagine if you're in your automotive, right? If you were at Ford or GM or whatever, right? They've, conferences and everyone there is, building cars and they're all about, cars. You don't really have the same sort of effect. So there's not really as much of a, there's not trade magazines for software and et cetera. So I would say that, of course, my customer acquisition and marketing and visibility building has evolved over time. I kind of look at it in a couple of different pillars. So the first is, I think you just have to do standard business development. So you have to kind of maintain relationships with people, uh, especially with the type of work that I do. It's really built upon a level of trust and intimacy because there's a large amount of vulnerability involved in somebody hiring an external party to come in and solve a pretty hairy strategic issue.
Mhm.
And so there's, those relationships need to get built over a very long time. And so you just kind of need to be there, nurturing those relationships. I've layered that on over time because you do need to think about ways that you can leverage, especially if you're running a smaller firm. You can only make so much noise. Like if I write a blog post or I do a piece of social media content, I mean, yeah, that has some reach, but or you have a newsletter that has some reach, but it's always going to be limited by the amount that you can kind of do on your own. And so this
Sure.
idea of partnerships is something that I've added to the repertoire over time, but not, I don't think it displaces sort of the one-on-one, but you look for ways to sort of figure out who else is playing in my pond in adjacencies that, you know, I can add value to them. I think that's I think it's maybe one of the biggest missteps that people make. And when I say people, I also mean me when they go out on this journey, because the thing that turns everyone off the most is when it feels highly transactional, when it's like, hey, like, if you know anybody who's looking for, pricing work, for example, like, reach out to me and I'll be happy, versus, I think what's worked a lot better is not indifferent from what you're doing, which is like, hey, how do I find other folks who are doing interesting things, make them, look good so that, we can mutually create, a piece of thought leadership, a piece of content that, highlights them and their capability and their firm's capabilities or their company's capabilities, where we're talking around, shared market problems, right? It's ultimately valuable to both of our audiences. And therefore, that can, I think again, those sort of you're nurturing over time as well. So, it's hard to say in this business that there's no easy answers. There's no like, consulting agencies hate this one weird trick to find customers.
Right. Yeah. No, that's a really great point. Yeah. I mean, I think the way that people, kind of like you illuminated with the pond comment there is who else serves my customers? Who else is working with the same people that I want to work with? I want to talk to that guy or that girl. I want to talk to the people that are working with my customers because they're probably going to have some crossover, some overlap. I can probably send them business. And that's the other thing I would say that I've learned about partnerships over 10 years is you got to bring value. Like nobody wants to partner with somebody that's a one-way street. Nobody really cares that much about a 10% referral fee on like $100 job, right? I mean, what is that going to get me, right? But if you're talking big ticket items or you're talking, two-way streets, people's ears perk up. But the one thing I really have learned is if I can send somebody a hot lead or I can send somebody that needs their services tomorrow, it opens up a lot more doors with the partnership where they go, oh yeah, you know what? We do have a couple people, that we work with that may want to work with you. And it's definitely gotten me a lot more business providing value first, right? And just coming out the gate saying, here's somebody that I think would fit what you just told me as your ICP and your customer. Love to make an introduction. And if nothing else, you stay in the network and then, maybe down the line they do have somebody that's a fit for you and you can kind of grow that partnership that way. So I love this, playing in the same pond metaphor there. That's very much the way that I approach things in partnerships now too. And next, so let's lead that into the next question. How else are you doing sales? You do outbound stuff? Is it all content based inbound? Like is it a mix? Like what are you doing to get new customers today?
Yeah. So I don't believe that in my line of work, it really makes sense to do any sort of cold outbound. I just don't think that's workable for the type of services that I offer. I'm willing to get proven wrong, but in when you're running a business, you've got to choose the go to market approaches that you think are the highest probability to win. And nobody that I've seen sort of doing similar type consulting has real been real successful with that. And it's, again, like I think it's just a level of trust that is
Mhm.
makes cold kind of very difficult to pull off in practice. So, in terms of the, in terms of how like clients or prospects who could become clients end up, in a conversation, it's definitely turned a corner from, I would say those, I say it started 5 years ago, probably at about the 2 year mark, it flipped from folks who kind of knew me directly from my network or a direct introduction from my network into folks who had come across my content, either appearing on podcasts or I host my own podcast or I'd done a partner event webinar, and then they were like, hey, like I've got this problem, you like I like what you said, let's have a conversation. So that flipped probably 2 years in. And I think that's a big thing too for a lot of folks I see going into this, because whether or not it's 1 year for you, it's 2 years, or it's 8 years, like at some point everyone's network dries up. There's only, a lot of people go into it and they have like massive success like year one. They just go on LinkedIn, say, hey, I'm out there to help. And they're the kind of like the shiny new penny. Everyone's like, oh yeah, I know Bob, he was great. I know Jay, he was great. Yeah, I've got this project. Could you help us out? At some point that sort of runs out. And then you're like, okay, what do I do now?
Right.
So I think my number one piece of advice who are folks who are in that first year and are like, man, just I haven't had to do anything. Like things are just falling in my lap. I said, enjoy it. I'm very happy for you. Take all your money and save it up and start working on how you fill the pipe when that stuff ends, because it will end. So yeah, in terms of the how folks find me now, I mean, it's I wish there was rhyme or reason. It's a lot of just being public, being on social media, being on podcasts, doing my podcast stuff, because folks would be like, oh, so and so said you're good with this, and then I don't know who so and so is. So it's like it's got so far removed from my initial network that there's it's very little to trace that back. It's a niche enough industry as well. I think that's it goes part and parcel, right? If you don't have a strong, definitive area that you're sort of known for, those type of introductions don't happen because it's like, oh, I help with strategy. Well, it's like I don't know, like that's not memorable, right? Or the other problem people run to is they try to be, oh, I could do strategy and operations and whatever. Well, the problem is as soon as you got to the second and, like, the person already forgot what the
Right.
first thing was. So, it only really works if you really sort of hone in on that kind of first step on what you're going to do. But like I said, I really do, the partnerships got to bring value. I think that the mindset that has been the most helpful is those activities you're going to do, whether it's a podcast, or a partner webinar or a piece of thought leadership content. I think you really need to make the investment that you're making about the relationship with that person, because the return is going to be so foggy distant in the future if you don't. I think you could become jaded of like, well, why am I pouring all this effort into it? I'm not seeing a return onto it. But if you really are invested in the relationship with that partner or that other party, then I think that gives you the incentive and the mission to keep going, because that, like, incrementally you're still adding value to that person and to the world, even if it's not appearing on this quarter's income statement.
Right. No, that makes a lot of sense. I love all of that, and I think being visible, you get beaten over the head in in college and young career about networking, and like you said, you kind of soak that pool up pretty quickly. And if you don't prepare for those days that are coming ahead, you're going to be kind of up the river with no paddle when all that dries up. So I think
Yeah.
those are really good.
I would give a little bit of a tactical piece of advice, because I made the negative comment before that I made it harder on myself by letting my network go cold while I was traveling. If you want to be an entrepreneur, so if you're an aspiring entrepreneur and you're working in a corporate job right now, take advantage of your current position to network, because it's
Yes.
way easier when you have a full-time job, you've got a VP title or director title, whatever it might be. Make as many good connections, like, set yourself a target of, I want to have 3 conversations with new people a week. Do that for a year. By the time you leave your position to go start your company, you will be in such a better place. Do not wait until you're out on your own and then try to start. It will be way harder. So if that's something you're dreaming about and you're like, well, I can't do it right now, I got to make it to my next bonus check or whatever, but I'm going to do it. Like, that would be something I would say go do right now, because that is something that, like, I wish I had known beforehand.
Yeah, that's beautiful advice. And I mean, you're dead on, right? I mean, it's like looking for a job when you already have one, right? It's so much harder when you don't have a job, but when you have one, it seems like everybody wants to hire you. So I think that's a really great. I love that idea. 3 a week, get out there and meet people. Yeah, I mean, use it to advance. I mean, even the people in your company, right? I mean, you can network in company. You have a bunch of resources right there. You don't have to go out and do a bunch of crazy stuff. Just meet people and be a personable human being, and it goes a long way. All right. Well, I have one more question for you, non-business related. If you could do anything on earth and you knew you wouldn't fail, what would it be?
Oh, man. That is a good question. I hate to say it. I mean, I kind of feel like I'm doing it. I feel like I had the I had this conversation with myself on a mountaintop when I was traveling around the world for a year and a half. And I
Fair,
was
you
like,
did travel around the world, so I mean, that's you've done some things.
yeah, I would say a thing that maybe, a thing that really sort of scares me, I would say, is, I've done I've done probably, I think at this point, 4 10-day meditation retreats. And I will be eligible to do, after my next one, to do a 20-day, and then you can do a 30-day, and then you can do a 45-day. I think, and I guess you really can't fail. But if I had the confidence to, that I knew I could make it through, I would probably say the 30-day version of that,
That
because
that's the first time I've ever heard that. That's beautiful. I'm a huge meditation junkie. I'm all about it. At least 10 minutes a day, right? Well, cool, man. If you want to find you, Dan, want to find more about Product Tranquility, how do they do that? How do they find you?
Yeah, so producttranquility.com. I try to blog fairly regularly there. Folks can contact me there. Happy to connect with folks on LinkedIn at Dan Balcauski. Just let me know you heard me on the podcast so I could separate it from the rest of the LinkedIn spam. If you're in the SaaS world or you want to learn how SaaS CEOs grow and scale their businesses, I've also got a podcast called SaaS Scaling Secrets where I interview scale up B2B SaaS CEOs. So these are all CEOs who have grown their businesses, sometimes multiple to 20 million plus. And so we talk about all of the challenges that they have when they're scaling, because I think a lot of people really focus on that sort of 0 to 1 story, the entrepreneur in a garage. Well, okay, that's great, but what happens when you've got 50 employees and you're trying to get to 100 employees and you've never managed 100 employees before, and then everything starts breaking, or you go into a COVID pandemic lockdown and like have to figure out how to maintain your culture as you're trying to double headcount year on year. So definitely trying to spread the love and insight on that side as well.
Love it, brother. All right. Well, Dan, you're great, man. Stay cool down there in Austin, Texas, and we'll catch up again soon. All right. Thanks for your time, buddy.
Thank you, Jay.
Yeah.